Hi, this is Jack Goggin with Stockworth Realty, and you're watching Jack's List, a show dedicated to giving the average consumer the insider information by bringing in industry experts and professionals in all things related to real estate. And today, I am joined by a friend and very excited to have this guest, Joe Ferst, who is Executive Vice President and General Manager for Central Florida for Hotwire Communications. Joe, welcome.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Happy to be here, Jack.
So let's jump right into it. For those who are not familiar with Hotwire Communications, can you tell us a little bit about the company?
Absolutely. So Hotwire Communications, different than Hotwire.com, right?
Yep.
So Hotwire Communications, we specialize in fiber optics throughout the United States. We're headquartered here in the great state of Florida. We have thousands of employees. Now, what do? We leverage that fiber optic infrastructure to provide internet service, video service, TV service, security solutions to the residential space as well as the enterprise space, again, throughout the United States. So our core focus is making sure that an industry that provides the fourth utility, which we call the internet, of course, video and phone services with that fourth utility is stabilized, is utilized properly, scalable, and is fiber directly to your home.
Yeah. And that's why I was so excited to have this conversation because really when we think of when you're buying real estate, if we're talking about water, it's really, hey, you just want to know, is it sewer or septic? Is it a well or is it a public utility? Electricity, it just is going to be what it's going to be. And it doesn't really change. These utilities have not really changed all that much in the last, 50, maybe 100 years.
Yep.
Technology, the fourth utility has radically shifted over, just in the last 5 years. Everything's changing. The bandwidth requirement, it's all over the place where I went, this is a really interesting conversation to have. And I know you moved up here. I helped with set you up in a rental on the beautiful Lake Butler chain.
Thank you for that.
You moved up from Fort Lauderdale. What inspired the move for you and Hotwire to come into Orlando?
So originally from Philadelphia, which is where Hotwire started.
Got it.
My wife and I have lived in South Florida for about 15 years. Fort Lauderdale is where our national headquarters is.
Yeah.
185,000 square foot facility. We own our own data centers, which you mentioned capacity. Over the years, starting back in 2002, we had to make sure that if we were going to be a player, we had to point it ourselves if we were ever going to pat ourselves on the back. Yeah. So in order for us to do that, we had to own, operate, maintain, and support all of our own infrastructure. What does that mean? Of course, the fiber. That means data centers, et cetera. So why was I in South Florida? That's why. I was luckily responsible for that market where our headquarters is from a operational perspective, from a sales or business development perspective, and a community outreach perspective. Now, why am I here? I'm here because we've had this market opened actually for about 12 years.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So Hotwire's been in the market for about 12 years, pretty heavy on the hospitality side.
Huge.
So obviously an experience-driven area when it comes to Central Florida. Our business is focused on the experience because what we do, besides what I talked about earlier, is we focus on that concierge level approach as a consumer. And where better to make sure that some of our people who understand experience, understand people, and understand what our residents and clients need than being in an area where the great man Walt Disney himself came and said, if you build it, they will come. And if you provide an all 10 out of 10 experience, you're going to be a lifelong loyal customer, just like we all are. So I'm here that over the last 12 years to make sure that continues. We're actually getting ready in September. We're going to be opening up a 4,000 square foot office in downtown Baldwin Park. And I hope you and the team get to join us.
Oh yeah, that's in my neck of the woods. So I didn't know that you guys, so really the reason to start laying all the infrastructure was for hospitality. Did you know that Orlando is the most traveled to destination in the world?
The Orlando Economic Partnership most certainly told me that during Leadership Orlando last month. So.
Yeah, where so since Hotwire was already here for the hospitality, that means that you already have a lot of the infrastructure set up. So expanding to residential use and a lot of what we talked about is your individual may not hire Hotwire because it's a pretty substantial utility. Where this is really geared around from the residential side, it's either new development communities or existing communities that are looking for an alternative to the cable companies.
Yes, you're exactly right. If you're looking for an alternative that's going to allow you to upgrade your current infrastructure,
Yeah.
right? Infrastructure that's in place today, it was phenomenal when it was in place for the last 30 years. It did its job.
Yeah.
Yet now it's antiquated technology, not because it's anyone else's fault, but it limits your ability to continue to be future proof.
Yeah.
It limits your ability to scale.
Hmm.
So what we do 20 years ago, our co-founder and current CEO and my friend and current boss, Kristen Johnson, she took a bet and said, I'm going to focus on fiber, whether that's today or whether it's the future. I'm going to make sure that if we're going to make a commitment to a certain level of service, response time, reliability, and that word used earlier, capacity to provide service, it has to be fiber optics. So we've done that. We continue to do that. And all throughout our 9 markets, our 9 states that we have that we're providing service in 15 DMAs, which is the market, the area that the video can be provided, we are the provider of our services. We support it. We maintain it. We have boots on the ground to make sure that that continues to happen as we scale.
Yeah. And we're going to dive in a little bit to that really interesting conversation about fiber optic versus cable. But
Absolutely.
before we do that, let's get a little personal. What got you started in the telecommunication industry?
So besides for the fact that my wife and I moved down here many years ago from the Northeast,
Yeah.
she
Whereabouts?
right outside of Philadelphia,
Yeah.
a little town called Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. She's from the Pocono Mountains
Oh, yeah.
in northeastern Pennsylvania. If you ever been up there, we moved down here because what's better than sunshine and palm trees if you're going to work?
Yeah. No
So,
kidding.
luckily enough, once we moved down here, my family was gracious enough. They're in the development and construction industry. I got started with a little bit of that and realized I like people. I love communicating. I love connecting. And someone had connected me with our CEO, and I had the ability to have a conversation with her and a few of the other partners in reference to what made sense on why they were in business. And they weren't in business to just be an internet provider. They were in business to be the best internet provider. They were in business to provide a different level of service than's out there today, above standard, and to disrupt the industry from a concierge level approach perspective.
Yep.
Meaning when you go into the Four Seasons or you call Capital One or Amazon, you like that experience, right? So for us, the focus and pillar was always to make sure that it's above industry standard. Our NPS scores were well above the service industry. And for the last 20 years, we continue to do that.
And I'm gonna watch my words and tread lightly because I don't want to get you in trouble. But I know, speaking from personal experience and just the general sentiment, is a lot of people have voiced frustration with the old school cable companies from that customer service standpoint. And what I found so interesting with Hotwire is, those old school cable companies, they, when they're developing a section of a city and, like when they lay the water pipes and power lines, they got in there and, use the same poles. And for the most part, you're kind of stuck with, name a company that just services that one industry. And I really viewed it as, well, it's tough to compete for power because you need that infrastructure. It's tough to compete with water. I assumed it would just naturally be tough with telecommunications, but the fact that your guys' company has been able to get into what is, I assume, an incredibly hard industry to break into just from that infrastructure requirement.
Absolutely.
Where it seems, and just from the deep dive that I did, the customer service aspect, getting higher value, maybe similar price, but more capability, where it seems very customer focused versus what I think a lot of people complain.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, and I'm glad you really dove into that. So, specializing, how did we get into it? Right, the ability to, do you want to use my words correctly as well?
Yeah,
Um,
they might be watching.
the ability to make a choice for your community
Yeah,
is important.
yeah,
the ability to have great overbuilders, which Hotwire is an overbuilder fiber optic company. We happen to be, one of the largest, but there's many out there,
Yep.
right? And Hotwire isn't everywhere.
Mhm.
So from an industry perspective, you want to make sure that there is competition,
Mhm.
but there's not too much competition to where it's diluted to where the service drops,
Yep.
right? For
The
instance,
race to the bottom.
a race to the bottom.
Yep.
Exactly. So the ability to have your board, whether it's homeowner, condo association, that's in place today, to make decisions, just like they're making decisions for landscapers, et cetera, to make a decision on the behalf of the residents and almost like a Costco type of purchase,
Mhm.
right? It's bulk pricing.
Yep.
And that's the model and the specific industry that we're in from a fission perspective, which is our residential product, that allows the consumer to meet at that intersection of amazing service and speed,
Yep.
right? Or value and a service approach,
Yep.
where you can go out there, and many are out there today, and I'm a consumer myself. If I don't have access to an overbuilder, I'm going to go out there and at least do my research to see what's available,
Mhm.
right? So what I look for is, reliability, scalability, and who's going to help me when I have a problem,
Yeah.
right? And for us, to answer your
Customer
question,
service.
how did we get into it? Well, we focused on that pillar of making sure that we were the ones that were going to be able to point back at ourselves if there was a challenge, pat ourselves on the back to keep moving forward when it goes well, and then also give you the ability to contact someone that's familiar with your property.
Yep.
All of our customer experience center associates are US based. So you're calling in the United States,
Yep.
you're calling people that are assigned to your properties. And what we're most proud of is that we disrupted the industry for that to be a norm, where 10 years ago it was not.
No.
So
Good.
more and
You
more
just didn't
today.
have to.
Yes.
Because who else are you? We're bit of a crude show, but I don't know if you ever saw, there was a South Park episode that was talking about the cable companies and internet companies where they're making parody of, oh, you're not having this great customer service. Oh, so sorry.
Yes.
Maybe you go to
Just
someone else.
poking fun
Oh,
at it.
oh, wait, there is nobody
Yeah.
else. And I assume that was where you're just kind of stuck with it. Too bad, so sad. If you don't like your water company, what are you going to do? Drill new pipes? Probably not.
And one scenario that you bring up a good point is that your community, again, on the residential side,
Yep.
if you live in a homeowner or condo association, they choose an overbuilder. Let's say they choose Hotwire. We have specific prerequisites and requirements that your board has put in place and that we have committed to,
Yep.
that are standard within our agreements that say, if this happens, then that.
Yep.
So that's called a service level agreement. And within that service level agreement, there are specifics. And then if that service isn't met or well above that, then there's a breach of contract.
Yeah.
Now, for us, we put our money where our mouth is, and we say we guarantee you that we're going to provide you with this level of service. We also guarantee that we're going to respond if there's an issue or a challenge this quickly. So we have the measures in place. We have the measures in place to respond when needed and when called upon.
Yep.
That's something that's completely different that changed within the industry as well. Because like you said, if there's not a choice, then there must be prerequisites put in place that says this needs to be achieved. And that's the old school. Now there
Yeah.
are choices.
Now it's
and
consumer
within there
confidence is
are
key.
decisions, and that leads to loyalty.
Yeah. And so what's a good way to put this? I don't know if it can be announced, but you have a large new community that's taking on
Yes.
Hotwire running
Yes.
fiber optic, where when a HOA or a community decides to make that switch, what is the reasoning that you're finding they want to move away from, the cable companies and go with your guys' product? What's their
So,
motive?
So the main motive is that they have the conversation, right? They're doing their research to find out what's available.
Yeah.
And then from there, okay, we want better speeds, right? That's usually the first conversation that happens.
Mhm.
Right after that is we need better service. And typically they don't align, but they should.
Yeah.
And in the future they will. So they're exactly saying what you and I just went over. Speed, future proof. If we're going to have a project, we want to do it once.
Yep.
So we need to make sure that whoever we choose to move forward with, that construction project, because it certainly is a construction project,
Yep.
moving from one provider to another in the community itself. So one project one team, one company for a long-term partnership. And that's something that a lot of the communities, at least in Central Florida that we're speaking with now, they're starting to dive into, we're looking for a partner. We're not necessarily, we've went the route of having a vendor.
Yep.
We've went the route of having someone, and now we're looking for a long-term partnership because we don't want it to happen again. But you have to ask them, what is it?
Yeah.
Sometimes it is the construction phase. Sometimes it was they went with a provider that maybe is no longer in business. Sometimes they'll go with someone who was the cheapest because it made the most sense at the time.
Yep.
All of them are saying, I want to do it once. I want to future-proof this so that when I leave as a board member, my legacy is that we had great service, we made great choices, and that we're in a partnership for the next decade and for decades to come.
And as far as the thinking of the end consumer, someone who just happens to own a house in this community, instead of having your account with the cable company, it's actually wrapped into the HOA fees. Is that correct?
So it is. So yes, typically, and that's bulk. Again, you go back to that bulk type of model.
Yep.
But
Costco
if you're-
style.
Yes,
Yep.
not taco style.
Taco
Costco.
style.
But yes, if currently today you live in a community where you're a homeowner and condo association, within your dues, you're paying for a certain level of video service. Well, that's someone, that community, when that contract comes up, that's someone that should be reaching out to competitors or people in the market like Hotwire. If you're in a Hotwire market, absolutely make sure that your board reaches out to ask, again, questions about what's available, how are you servicing it, et cetera. But you asked, how does that work? So it works because you're currently paying for it today. Now, what we are seeing is that many of those current communities that are paying for those services for video are saying, look, what if we swap out video and do internet only? Or what does it look like if we add internet onto that?
And you can custom build a package
You
that
can
is
custom
most
build
relevant.
packages. There's going to be a standard because we truly believe in everyone might not be a Hotwire customer, but if you believe that the value's there, we can figure out how to make it work. But there has to be a certain level.
Yep.
There's going to be a certain level of speed. There's going to be a certain level of financial efforts from the board side and the community side, because we're going to make sure that we can service you properly. Maybe it's not today, maybe it's not tomorrow, but if it is right for you today, then a company like Hotwire that makes the most sense is going to be your choice. Now, if you don't currently have that today and you live in a community that has 250 single family homes, and you're not taking advantage of potentially even seeing what type of volume prices is out there, you have choice, which is great. But you're probably paying somewhere between $150 and $300 a month, and everyone is utilizing that. Understanding and doing research on what does internet bring to the table. Again, it's the fourth utility.
Yeah, and
So
it's
how can
huge.
you win? How can everyone win from service, speed, and again, scalability for the future?
Yeah, and I know, going back to my industry, just with real estate, the communities that have certain levels of internet speed, or they have Cat 5 built in, it brings value.
Absolutely.
Where you almost think, up until recently, I didn't know that there really were alternatives. I thought it was, whoever it is. So my word of advice if you're already on the HOA board, or, if you're already in a position where you have a say in this, that's one thing. But to residences, if you are struggling with your internet and, the infrastructure is just not set up great where you are, rally some friends together and start tugging on the ears of whoever does make those decisions, and at least go, hey, at least have a conversation with other alternatives. And I loved, this kind of cracked me up. And the more I looked into it, the more I went, where you guys have every right to just lay it out this way. It was a YouTube video on Hotwire's page where it kind of rolled in, went, trying to make the decision if you should change something as significant as, infrastructure for connectivity. It's a big decision, but we're not too worried about that, essentially, because once we go through the numbers and how the contract is laid out, the service that's provided, we really don't have much of an issue on making this decision.
Absolutely.
And I love that they just went, we have the confidence to go, if you see what we have to offer, we're going to beat the competition. I went, oh, I love that.
You're exactly right. And
Never
also,
heard the cable company say
and
that.
along with that is once we commit, we're
Yeah.
doing it.
Yep.
Right. There is no, oh, well, you need to, this is extra.
Yep.
Right. Now, what is different is, again, we come in at that fundamental foundation of saying these are the services you're going to be receiving.
Yep.
We have a team. That's that concierge level approach. It's actually how I
Mhm.
started with Hotwire
And
itself.
I saw white glove.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
term where I went, oh, that's such a shocking term. White glove experience with someone who provides internet is like such a foreign idea.
And in Central Florida, who wears the white gloves here? Mickey. Right?
Mickey.
Right? Disney from an experience perspective. So, full circle to Central Florida.
Yeah.
Why Orlando? Why Central Florida? Well, it's in the middle of the state.
Yeah.
But most importantly, we specialize in the experience of our business, our experience with our service, our experience with people, and the experience of our employees.
Yeah.
So why not thrive in a market that was built on experience?
I was just about to say that.
And that's exactly why we're here today and have been for 12 years.
Yep.
And now we are investing capital, both financially and human capital within the market itself. And that's engineers, that's for business development, that's for account management, that's for attorneys. There's many other divisions within Hotwire outside of just the engineer and, of course, our amazing field ops crews and those that actually in construction that get it done every single day. There's so much opportunity. And the reason I go into this topic is because we have so many students and amazing graduates here that leave our great state of Florida. And I want to make sure that they know, and we continue to do this with the local colleges and the state colleges, that we're here. And whether it's Hotwire and Fission, that's cool, or EA Sports, that is cool, we're here, and we want to make sure that they know that. And that's another reason that we're here. And of course, we're all throughout the state of Florida as well.
Yeah. And I didn't even think about that. Great location to get that next generation of worker. I mean, between, FSU, UF, UCF, I mean, it's
Nova Southeastern University is down south.
Yeah.
We have regional campuses up here as well.
Yeah, we're stacked
Holland.
with that. Where we touched a little bit on it before, and I want to dive into this topic, is fiber optic versus your classic cable. For someone who has no idea what it is, what's the difference between the two?
So I'll give a few analogies, but first, the difference would be just sheer size.
Yeah.
Right? You have your coax cable, which we all have in our home. Inside of that is copper.
Yep.
Copper can be tapped into. Copper is the same thing. I think you mentioned you love audio visual, so that you can tap into that and gather information, right? From a fiber perspective, it's glass inside of it. So the amount of information that can be sent from one side to another is limitless because it's at the speed of light. So that's one thing. A basic analogy is your cable is basically like a garden hose, right? And in the past, it was amazing.
And it was fine.
Right?
Sufficient.
We I think we talked earlier about the AOL sound,
Yeah.
right? When we would all get online and then someone pick up the phone and it would go off. During that time, we were talking about uploading pictures. We weren't transmitting files and streaming video, utilizing Netflix, etc. So at the time, that was built perfectly.
Yeah.
And it lasted for a really long time.
And our bandwidth requirement, or what's the proper term? Our consumption I know it's got to be exponentially more than what it was 20 years ago or
it's a compounding
years
effort.
ago.
It's compounding just like dollars and cents.
Yeah.
And when in the past, a speed of 10/3 was considered high speed.
Yeah.
And that definition, I think it actually might have been 15/3. And that's where the local cable companies and telephone companies were able to get us all connected. No one's ever going to say that the OG and the godfathers of the business didn't get everyone started, and they sure did, and we're thankful for that.
Yeah.
But it also gave us the opportunity to think in the future. How do we future-proof and make sure that it's going to be able to scale? The word I keep using. How do we make sure it's more reliable? Your question, you have your coax, which it's starting to go end of life.
Yeah.
And then you have your fiber optics, which it really depends on the equipment on both sides of the fiber.
Yeah.
As long as technology continues to evolve, like it's going to, then you simply replace one side and the other, and you're able to transmit.
And you don't have to replace the cable or add more cables.
Yes, because you can leverage the glass inside differently.
Yeah.
And as technology continues to evolve, that hardware is just going to be able to continue to not just replicate itself, but reload itself.
Yep. Yeah. And it's funny to think about. So, what was it? 20 years ago when I was still living in my parents' house, I'm trying to think of how many devices needed internet access. It was probably 2 computers.
2 computers.
Yeah, maybe 3,
Yeah,
but nothing.
Maybe your phone connected to the gateway.
Yeah, and even 20 years ago, it didn't have an iPhone. So that was just, whatever.
We were playing Snake on the Nokia.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Where there wasn't internet connectivity. It was amazing when an Xbox you could play with other people outside of your house, where that was amazing. Now I think about it and I'm like, well, I have 4 Roku devices, 5 computers, probably 20 smart light bulbs. I have a smart thermostat, where there's probably 50 things through my house. And that the requirement from just the infrastructure, the line running to my house, it hasn't changed since 1950. And today, I mean, it's working, but if things continue to compound the way it is, I can only imagine that the raw copper material, it's going to get bottlenecked. It's not going to suffice.
And you're right. And you bring up a good point, right? So we're talking about the industry of fiber.
Yeah.
Like bringing fiber to the home and making sure that it's no longer that hose filling up a 10-foot sewer hole.
Yeah.
Or sewer 10-foot wide sewer hole, right? Which is dumping into.
Or in Florida, a beautiful sparkling pool.
Yes, there
in
we
the
go.
Backyard.
So what we want to make sure of is right when you get connected into your home, right?
Yep.
Sometimes you have a great provider, sometimes you have a antiquated provider. But the next step is making sure, what are you connecting to, right? Your Wi-Fi access points within your home. So if you don't have the opportunity to work with a company like Hotwire or another overbuilder or someone who's going to be able to have that capacity that says, hey, here's your 300 symmetrical, which is the same up and same down. Typically in the cable industry, it's high speed download, low speed upload. So that's why when you're working from home and you're having your Zooms or your video meetings, typically you're getting everyone's feed, but yours isn't as clear as you'd like it to be.
Oh, trying to upload this podcast is going to take forever.
Yeah. Right?
It always does.
We'll work on getting you a Hotwire ready.
Yeah, no kidding.
But access points.
Yeah.
How are you connecting? You're connecting to those Wi-Fi devices within your home. That is now your lifeline that controls the experience within your home.
Yeah, and that's like
reliability.
Routers, modems, stuff like that.
You're exactly right. Access points, routers, modems, and you have the ability that you can either find then the cable companies that certainly they provide that level of service, or you can go out and you can purchase them yourself.
Yeah, often extenders.
But make sure of, and you and I talked about it. Do your research. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah.
And even if that's contacting someone local like me or someone that we talked about earlier. Everyone knows a guy.
Yep.
Just make sure that someone has not necessarily just used them, but trust them.
Yep.
You're going to get the right information from them. And the best people are the ones that maybe even aren't selling it to you or are using it themselves.
Yeah.
For me, I utilize all the services before I can refer someone because I'm coming up on a big milestone birthday. And prior to that, I used to give referrals on people that I just thought were great and they spoke well and and they talked the talk. But it's hard to find people that walk the walk, and that's what you want to find. And I know you have a great list of people that do walk the walk.
Yeah, or try to, and that's the whole motivation. We talked at length before we went live on this. That's the whole motivation of this podcast is, in my experience, not to throw shade, is your average person in these different real estate industries, when you're talking about something so incredibly important as real estate, whether it's buying or selling it, like my world, or if it's someone's repairing my plumbing in my house, it's a huge decision to make, even if it's a small item, because if he does it wrong, it might flood your house. And then you have to pull insurance. And then, granddad's documents are ruined. Where I go, the stakes are so high when we talk about real estate. And in many industries, including my own, I feel like often it's not taken as seriously as it should be. And that's why I go, let me grab all of the people I know and trust, and I personally hire all day to go, okay, talking to your average person who might be in Montana, trying to hire a plumber, what's those words of advice to them so they can at least know enough to not make a dumb decision? And as far as your average consumer, let's say, they don't have access to Hotwire, they're not in that community, but as someone who's an expert in telecommunication, what's the biggest mistake you see people make?
Choosing to join the race to the bottom,
Yeah.
right? Taking that promotion that says, oh, well, I can do this. It's only going to be this for 12 months.
Yep.
Well, what is it going to be after that? Good question to ask.
Yeah.
Right? And not taking into account how much your time is worth.
Yeah.
Right? And if you work from home, that's a whole different conversation
Mm-hmm.
and a whole different amount of time you should be spending on what's available.
Yep.
Right? And that's for anything that you do. But in my industry, which is telecommunications, and we're talking about internet, if you're working from home, even one day a week, you need to make sure that that's going to be reliable, or at least be aware that what is available, that everyone that you're working with knows, right? I think that's something that from a professional perspective, we don't share enough.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's something that I think is probably extremely important. And then from a personal perspective, I mean, I have 3 kids, 8, 7, and 4, and my wife, and we're in our home, and we are connected together. But then when we're connected, utilizing all of the IoT devices like you had discussed,
Yep.
Whether we're watching TV or they're utilizing their iPads, whether if it's for school or pleasure,
Yep.
if it's not going to work, we need to know that it's not going to work, or limit the amount of devices that you're going to have. But like you said earlier, it continues to compound. You didn't even mention that your refrigerator, your washer, your dryer, your
They all
alarm
connect to
system.
my phone.
Now the door
Oh
knob
yeah,
to get into
my
your
security
home.
system, which I always
But I would
forget.
say-
I open the door and it freaks out all the neighbors
And your dogs.
and the dog.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, they're not connected, but everything
But I would
that takes
say
care of them.
lack of research.
Yeah.
And then when you're buying a home, ask those questions.
Yeah.
Ask those questions.
That's one thing where kind of the joke running around now is you see, the cable attachment, and more people just don't use cable, where it's like, look at that old dinosaur. But that's one of the questions that when I represent buyers, I dive into, or I already know in X, Y, and Z, neighborhood. It may sound like a small item, but they have lightning fast internet because they just did this,
Yes.
like Nona's notorious for it.
Absolutely.
Where in some areas, it's just exceptionally slow
Yep.
and just off grid. Where it's a huge selling point. I know. It's funny where with all the stresses in life, in my experience, when technology doesn't work, it is the most frustrating thing when you're trying to download a file and it keeps failing. I mean, it can just make you pull your hair out.
Yes.
Where do you think that with the increase in demand, you told me a statistic earlier on just how much capacity we're anticipating we're going to need with, technological advancements. What was that number again?
So, well, in reference to the IoT devices.
Yeah.
Right. So right now it's about 12 to 15 per person within your home.
Got it.
They foresee that over the next few years going to like 30 to 40
Yeah.
per person in your home, which means, again, back to those access points, that it's going to need the capabilities to make sure it stays connected.
Yep.
But another piece of that is it's constantly connected. Those
Yeah,
devices are
all the time.
constant. So it's as if you have a glass of water in the middle of your home, and by the time you go to use it, half of it is being consumed all of the time from
Yep.
TVs being
Never turns off.
refrigerators, etc. So that's where, if we don't make sure that you have the ability in the future, and I'm just saying as an industry,
Yep.
we want to make sure that multi-gig, which I'm sure you've seen the commercials, gigabits,
Yep.
that has to do with speed.
Yep.
And the way that we deploy it is that we're deploying in every single home moving forward multi-gigabit deployments. So in the future, if you want 1 gig, if you want 2 gig, and that's 1,000 megabits,
Yep.
2,000 megabits, 10,000. We're testing in our labs now 25 gig, 25,000. It allows for you to have that in the future.
Gotcha. And from from an infrastructure standpoint, because so much of the existing infrastructure is with copper cables that do naturally have their limitations, do you think we're going to run into an issue in the future where the infrastructure just can't support this rapidly accelerating demand? Or are we already there?
In the home or in the streets or all over?
Just average consumer in a house.
I would say that we're already there.
Really?
As an industry outside of, Hotwire and where we focus, but we're all doing what we can to make sure that it limits the exposure of antiquated technology today, but that also makes sure that we have a place within this business. Because we are ensuring that although we may not have been one of the grandfathers of the telecommunications industry, we were the pioneer when it comes to gigabit bandwidth for the state of Florida. We were the first to bring gigabit to the state of Florida. We were first to bring 10 gigabit, and that's Hotwire specifically. And then the industry was allowed to take that to the next level. But we're there today. Now, in your home, you have the ability to upgrade that infrastructure within your home, depending on who's coming to your home. So, for instance, if one of our communities move forward with us, we upgrade that infrastructure within the home, the coax cable, or we utilize wireless services. And then, of course, we have a commercial Fission Enterprise department that works with the NFL, the different all the different athletic leagues and stadiums throughout the U.S., as well as your mom and pop shops and in between there, to make sure that they have a truly substantial, reliable, and service available to them as well.
That's wild. And do you think, looking towards the future, where do you think the industry is going to head, or what's going to change? Do you think everything's going to have to start running fiber optic, or?
I think that it's going to be a diverse approach. I think that fiber optics are what are ultimately always going to bring the industry back together. Even in 5G or fifth generation technology, which really focused on cellular. And instead of many to one tower, where the industry changed from one to many small towers. For instance,
I've seen those around town where if anyone's driven around town and went, what the heck is that? It looks like some sort of like dystopian surveillance thing where it's this short pole that kind of bulbs out. And I was like, I wonder what that is. I don't see a camera on it. It's a 5G. Got it.
Yeah, so 5G is fifth generation of technology. So with that was the cellular side of things to enhance that, because what was happening was we were all on our phones calling that one tower, which would be here, right? And density increased. Everyone got phones. So then from there it was, how do we make sure that everyone can continue to hop and be on their phone at the same time without overloading it? Why I go into that is because, yes, we work with the cell phone companies to do that as well. But fiber optics bring the communication and the data from those small cells back to the large towers.
Got it.
Now, there will be some scenarios out there, of course, with Elon Musk, and you have
Starlink.
You have Starlink. And I think that it's going to be a mix. It really goes back to what is the best fit for you, Jack. And right? asking questions, doing your research so that you make your decision on wired is always going to be better. At least. I don't want to be like the Today Show when they said, "Oh, who needs the internet?" Right. In the foreseeable future, a connection, a wired connection, is typically going to be more reliable, I should say.
And something like where I just love that there are disruptors in this industry, where you guys, in one way, Starlink's the other one that comes to mind. Do you think something like a Starlink is maybe more applicable to off grid? If you have a house where you really can't get wired internet into because you're on 5 acres or whatever, maybe Starlink is the more realistic move. Or I know people use it with their vans. I thought about doing it with my racing trailer when I'm at the track. But really, for metropolitan areas, probably the next advancement that'll become normal is probably wired, and it's going to be fiber optic.
If it's not there today, for instance, like the Metro Orlando area, I mean, we're here now. Right. And we've been here for 12 years. And of course, the good thing is that there's other options. And we just want to make sure that we're part of that conversation to continue to push the industry. Not saying everyone needs to choose our company.
Yeah.
but you should know what's available, when it's available, what the options are. And then I think from a Starlink perspective or a wireless service provider perspective, they certainly have their place.
Yeah. Just it's going to be more restricted on probably performance.
It absolutely is going
But it
to
can be
at the
mobile.
current time
Yep.
limited.
Yep.
But it absolutely is mobile, right?
Yeah.
Depends on you. For instance, my wife and I and my family, we like to camp.
Yep.
So we take our camper and we have Starlink when we take longer trips to make sure that we can stay connected.
Yeah.
And that is important. Fit the need at that scenario.
Totally.
In my home now, I would rather a connected connection. It makes the most sense for me today.
So interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And man, it's just such an interesting conversation. I think we all forget just how connectivity today it's a necessity, like water, air, and food, where second your internet shuts down, you realize just how much of a necessity it is to, where like in my wife's world, even with, from a medical standpoint. So Joe, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Jay.
Yeah.